The city had a way of swallowing people whole, its streets lined with glass and steel that reflected lives in fragments. Ethan had walked this same path every day for years, a predictable route from his apartment to work. Past the row of familiar storefronts, the cafe on the corner, the boutique with its ever-changing window displays. One evening, as he strolled past a small antique shop wedged between two larger stores, something caught his eye. The glass in the window was old, slightly warped, its surface uneven, like the skin of a rippling pond. He glanced at his reflection out of habit, expecting to see himself mirrored back as always, but something was wrong. He stopped. His reflection did not. It was the briefest lag, half a second at most, a trick of the light surely. Ethan blinked hard, willing away the unease that prickled the back of his neck. He moved his hand experimentally, watching the image mimic him a fraction too late. A cold breath of wind swept through the street, but Ethan hardly noticed. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. Shaking his head, he continued on, pushing the thought aside. Maybe the glass was old enough to distort movement. Maybe he was overtired. But the next evening, it happened again, and the next. At first, it was just the delay, a subtle but unmistakable hesitation between his actions and the reflection's response. But as the days passed, the lag grew more pronounced. He started testing it, lifting an arm, turning his head, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Each time, the reflection followed, just a moment too late. It was wrong. The feeling burrowed under his skin, a quiet dread he couldn't shake. By the end of the week, he'd stopped glancing into the antique shop's window altogether, forcing himself to stare straight ahead whenever he passed. And yet, he could feel it. Something watching him. Something waiting. Ethan tried to ignore it. He told himself it was stress, exhaustion, some trick of perception, but his own logic felt flimsy, like a thin layer of ice beneath his feet. He took different routes to work, avoiding the antique shop entirely. But no matter where he walked, it wasn't long before he caught glimpses of himself in other reflective surfaces. Car windows, puddles on the pavement, the polished metal doors of the subway, and the reflection was always wrong. At first, the delay was the only difference, but then it started moving in ways it shouldn't. One night, he stood at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. The rain had left shallow pools along the street, and in one of them, his reflection stood distorted but visible. He wasn't looking directly at it, just watching in his periphery. That was when it happened. His reflection turned its head toward him. Not a trick of the water, not a ripple. It turned on its own. Ethan's stomach twisted, his breath catching in his throat. He stepped back, heart hammering. The reflection didn't mimic the movement. It only stared. He stumbled away, nearly colliding with a passerby. He didn't care. It was getting worse. The next day, he forced himself to test it again, standing in front of his bathroom mirror at home. He raised his hand. His reflection did the same. He turned his head left. The reflection followed. For a moment, he felt relieved. Maybe he had imagined everything. Then, just as he reached for the light switch to leave, he saw it. His reflection's mouth had moved. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't made a sound, but his reflection's lips had parted slightly, as if whispering something he couldn't hear. A shudder ran through him. He stopped looking into mirrors. He avoided reflective surfaces whenever possible, but the world was filled with them. He couldn't escape. One night, as he walked home, he caught sight of himself in a darkened storefront window. His reflection had stopped moving altogether. He walked forward. It stood still. His blood ran cold, and then, with slow, deliberate motion, the reflection lifted its hand, long after Ethan had stopped moving. It was no longer just lagging behind. It was independent. It was watching him. Ethan barely slept anymore. The weight of unseen eyes pressed on him every waking moment. His reflection had become something else, something separate, something wrong. It was no longer just a delayed image in the glass. It had a will of its own. He saw it everywhere now, in the subway doors, in the blank TV screen late at night, in the glossy surface of his phone when it was powered off, always there, always watching. It mimicked him less and less. It moved on its own. One evening, as he neared his apartment, he passed a long stretch of darkened storefronts. The glass windows reflected the empty sidewalk, the neon glow of distant signs, and, of course, him. He told himself not to look, but he did, and this time it was waiting. The reflection stood perfectly still, its face an empty mask of his own features. His real body was moving, walking forward, but the reflection did not. He stopped. His breath fogged the glass, but the air inside the store was still. The reflection should have faded in the misted glass, but it didn't. It remained sharp, clear. His stomach twisted into knots. And then the reflection raised its hands and pressed them flat against the inside of the glass. Not a mirror image, not a normal response. The hands pressed outward. It was trying to get out. His pulse pounded in his ears. His legs trembled, locking him in place. And then its lips moved. "Let me out." The words formed silently, slow and deliberate, spoken from behind the glass. A bolt of cold panic shot through Ethan's chest. His breathing turned shallow, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. He shook his head. "Number?" The reflection tilted its head in something almost like amusement. Its hands pressed harder against the inside of the glass, fingertips ghosting against the surface as though testing for weaknesses. Ethan took a step back. The reflection didn't. Instead, it grinned. A horrible, twisted imitation of his own expression stretched its lips, a movement that did not belong to him. And then, without warning, the glass cracked. A thin fracture split the surface, a jagged, spidery vein spreading outward from the center of the reflection's face. The sound was deafening in the empty street. Ethan stumbled back, nearly falling. His reflection did not move. It only smiled wider. The glass cracked again. A deep, splintering wound ran from the top of the pane to the bottom. The surface rippled, distorted, like something beneath it was pushing outward, desperate to break free. Ethan turned and ran. He sprinted down the sidewalk, heart hammering against his ribs. The city blurred around him, neon lights streaking past, his own breath ragged in his ears. He didn't dare look at any other reflective surfaces, didn't dare see if it was following him. He reached his apartment and slammed the door shut, chest heaving. He flicked on every light, banishing the darkness from every corner. He stood in the center of the room, hands shaking. The TV was off. The windows reflected the city lights. The polished floor held a faint, distorted version of himself. Slowly, cautiously, he turned toward the nearest mirror. For a moment, his reflection looked normal. Then it blinked. Not at the same time as him. It blinked first. And then, in the silence of his apartment, it mouthed the words, "One more time. Let me out." The lights flickered. The mirror shattered. and the reflection was no longer inside.